And welcome back to Open. After the deadline has expired for the Congress to make a decision on the DREAM Act, what will the future be for dreamers? Here to talk about this and much more in the world of politics, we welcome Lee Bynes. Lee, good to have you.
Good to be back.
Welcome back. I know you've been under the weather and looking good, kid.
Well, positive things happen.
That's it. That's it. Well, listen, breaking news today is, of course, we know today is going to be the National Walkout Day. Kids walking out of school for 17 minutes in response to the shooting in Florida. A lot of people saying it's controversial, kids walking out, but one thing can be said for sure, people are paying attention to the impact that these young people are making politically.
But you know what? It's unfortunate because the fact of the matter is that they are young people and they're not really ready to vote yet. So Congress isn't going to really pay a lot of attention to them. Not only that, it is good to see them out there participating and getting themselves involved early on, but they're going to have some pretty difficult lessons to learn, and I think that it's good that they're going to learn them early. The NRA decided to sue Florida. Florida passed some pretty significant gun control laws, nothing that you could really hang your hat on, but it was better than nothing. And the NRA, they got into the ear of the president, decided to convince him that raising the age limit to 21 for a long gun or the AR-15 wasn't a good idea. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what, I know who I was when I was 18 years old. You know, when I got into the car, it was 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. So the idea that you're going to put a weapon of that nature in the hands of a teenager is concerning. But for some reason, it seems as though the president is going along with the NRA. He's backing off of that issue. And these students out there are taking it to the streets, if you will. They're going to be, they went to Washington to protest. But I feel that in the long run, the lobbyists will win out. They always do. Disarming America is almost impossible. They're wedded to the Second Amendment. They're wedded to the idea of the right to bear arms. In fact, I wrote about this extensively at Issues Under Fire just a couple of days ago, and made a pretty strong case that the idea of public safety versus the right to bear arms, if it's a contest, the right to bear arms will win. This is America, after all.
Leah, going back to our lead story, talk about DACA, of course, the DREAM Act, and the deadline has passed. Where do we stand? What can we expect?
Well, you know, again, it's rather unfortunate because I wish I had some positive news to bring. But the president was out in California just the other day, yesterday, in fact, and he was touting the fact that we got the wall going. He was looking at some of the contractors' samples, if you will, and he's going full blast with this. And the other thing is that, again, Jeff Sessions decided to sue California because California is touting itself as a sanctuary state, not a city, but a state. San Francisco, all the way down to Los Angeles and San Diego, have decided to say, well, you know what, we're going to stand in opposition to ICE. In doing so, though, Sessions has called California out. In fact, the mayor of Oakland 2 weeks ago sounded the alarm to the Latino community to let them know that, you know, there's going to be an ICE raid coming up. Run, hide, find some places you can, you know, to protect yourself from these folks. And that's what brought on the suit from Jeff Sessions, because his idea is that California was standing in opposition to federal law. Federal law supposedly supersede state law, and we don't know how that's going to play out. But California's got a lot of dough, they got a lot of power. And if anybody could stand up to the federal government, it's California.
Yeah, I was going to ask your prediction pretty much looking at that.
Yeah, but I don't want to focus too much on California because the New York is pretty much in the same predicament, and they haven't been a focal point of the Justice Department yet. But I know a lot of folks here. In fact, some people that I know personally may not be documented, and those who aren't and were brave enough to bring their story to me have said that every time that they get in the car to drive, it's like they're worried. They don't want to get pulled over because even though the governor and the mayor has issued statements to say that the police shouldn't be able to ask what your status is, it's pretty much left up to the individual officer on that's stopping you, and if he or she has an issue with the undocumented population, they can make life miserable for you. So I don't really know where this is going to go, but I know it has fallen off the radar since March 1st, when that was a drop-dead date for them to get something done. It seems as though that ICE is going on steroids. They're expediting the arrest at a lot faster clip. It may not show itself up in places like New York and California, but in those flyover states, things are happening, and they're not just going after the worst of the people. They're going after anybody who can't prove that they are in this country legally. And let's face it, if you're in this country without papers, if you didn't come here the right way, you have committed a crime, and that's all it takes for them to pick you up and detain you, and eventually the deportation follows. So there's going to be a lot of sob stories out there.
Let's talk a little bit more about what's going on in Washington. White House, Rex Tillerson is out. It seems like this is the latest in what I call the White House apprentice. I mean, every time you turn around, somebody else is fired, leaving. What can we say about Tillerson's firing? And then also, who's waiting in the wings?
Well, you know what? We did see this coming. There was a lot of rumors out there saying that Tillerson wouldn't make it long, especially after he actually was overheard by several people calling the president an effing moron. Not only that, the president actually said that he and Tillerson were never on the same page. In fact, they weren't even reading the same book. I made some notes here because some of the things that Tillerson was against the president doing. One of them was moving the U.S. Embassy to Tel Aviv. I was moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That turned out to be an international disaster. He also was against pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He was also against pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, and a bunch of other stuff. You know, the list goes on and on. And one of the reasons why that one is probably the most difficult one to deal with is pulling out of the Iranian deal is because we're getting ready to enter negotiations supposedly with the North Koreans. If the North Koreans see that the United States is not honoring their bargain with the Iranians, why would they want to make a deal with the United States in any capacity? Now that Tillerson is out and they brought in Mike Pompeo, head of the CIA, he seems to be a pretty bright guy. He's graduated first in his class at West Point. But the problem is that the person who's filling his shoes at the CIA is a woman by the name of Gina Haspel. And just a little bit of digging, a little research led me to find that this woman was heading up the torture programs during the Bush era. Haspel, yeah, right after 9/11. The United States was hell-bent on finding out who was responsible, and they were taking prisoners. But what they were doing with them was not bringing them to the United States, but they were taking them to black sites, Thailand and other nations that would allow torture, if you will. And she oversaw the program with gusto in terms of waterboarding, stress positions, sleep deprivation, everything that you could possibly think of to get somebody to talk. And God forbid you didn't have anything to say that they wanted to hear, because those people suffered greatly. Now, why did the president pick this person? Is because if you recall, about 8-9 months ago, he was overheard saying, well, I actually made these statements in public that maybe torture or waterboarding wasn't such a bad idea. So with that in mind, if he looked at this person with this particular record, he could see the positives in that. Now, the problem with this whole thing is that she's got to be confirmed by the Senate. That's going to be a very, very difficult process.
Which I was going to say, Senate confirmation is coming up, and going before the Senate, given the fact of her history, given the fact of what has been said about terrorism and torturing and what the United States position is in, I believe that we should have a hard confirmation.
Very much so. In fact, she will be the first person to go before Congress and have to actually answer some of the questions. If you recall, she was one of the ones who was behind the fact of having the tapes, because during those sessions when they were interrogating people, they recorded them all. But when it came to light that what they were doing may have violated the Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, then all of a sudden those tapes were destroyed, and we never got a chance to see that evidence, and consequently nobody faced any consequences. So where this goes from here, I don't know. But again, those Senate hearings for her confirmation is going to be very, very interesting to watch.
What does this do for the GOP, given the fact that they're under a lot of scrutiny as is with the latest that's going on? Talk to us about the GOP and how they're making out in the wake of all of this.
Well, if you look at the election that took place last night in Pennsylvania, where a Democrat beat a Republican in a very, very ruby red state, that may signal what's going to follow in the future. And this is also after the president went there and campaigned for this guy, and he didn't do any good. Now, it was a razor-thin win, but it was a win, and it did take place in an area where Trump won that particular district, by 20 points over Hillary Clinton in the election when he won the presidency. Mm-hmm. So I would say that that's not necessarily a bellwether per se, but Democrats could take some heart in that. However, I always add this caveat to that statement, is that the Democrats have yet to carve out a space for themselves and offer the progressive wing of the party something to order, because moving down the line, because the progressives are the strength, the future, and provides all the energy moving forward. And unless they bring something on board for those folks, it could still be a topsy-turvy thing.
And the knock against Democrats is, listen, you cannot be anti-Trump and expect to win all these seats back. There has to be a more fleshed out campaign in really addressing the hearts and minds of many people, because voters nowadays, one thing is proven, is you certainly can't count any particular group for granted.
None whatsoever. And they did, the Democrats, as far as the progressive wing of the party is concerned, felt that they rolled over on health care. They didn't fight enough for it when they had an opportunity to hold up the budget. They rolled over on the DACA folks. They didn't fight as hard as they could. They shut the government down, for a couple of days, the second time for a couple of hours, but they didn't really put up all that much of a fight. They pretty much went with the status quo, gave the military-industrial complex every dime that they were looking for, and they pretty much moved on. As I said, a lot of water's gone by under the bridge since March 5th, and nobody's talking about DACA right now. And the big problem is not just DACA that we're concerned with. We're talking about the parents of the DACA, because if they did come up with a plan that would address those young people's concerns and their issues, they're still going to break up those families if their parents are asked or forced to leave. Right. So that's where we are.
Lee Bynes, thank you much. That's all we have here.
Good to be back.
All right, good to be back. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Feeling better. All right, Lee Bynes. Listen, take a quick break. We'll be back with more show. Stay with us. We're coming right back right after this.